Hey, beautiful, please consider subscribing to our channel if you've been enjoying these stories. Your support helps a lot. Aid us in reaching our goal of 1,000 subscribers.
The training dome smelled of ozone and scorched metal, a scent that clung to the nostrils like smoke from an ancient battlefield. Ringed by observation decks high above, the Colosseum-style arena was filled with the clatter of monstrous feet and the guttural laughter of creatures bred to dominate planets. They towered, each of them, scales, chitin, plated hide, or obsidian-colored flesh flexing with power. Their languages were harsh, filled with growls and hisses, punctuated by cruel jeers. And in their midst stood a man. Human, male, barely 6 feet tall, and by their standards, fragile. Elias Ward adjusted the straps on his combat vest, its earth-made fabric scorched in places where training rounds had nearly melted through. His breathing was slow, calm, practiced. He had learned long ago that panic was a predator's favorite scent. Above, in the command tower, alien instructors peered down with amused contempt. The reptilian warlord overseeing today's session chuffed a deep sound of ridicule, translated roughly across the comms. Place the prey flesh in the first match. Let the blood stain early. Elias didn't flinch. He'd heard worse. The first opponent lumbered into the sand ring, a Vronak bruiser from the frost moons of Kelthar, whose body was more boulder than flesh. It snarled at Elias through 6 rows of tusks, its breath steaming in the cold-controlled air. Laughter boomed through the arena. A human? Against a Vronak? It was theater, not trial. But Elias had learned. Not just how to fight, but how to think in places that smelled of war. He didn't stand in one place. He didn't posture. He moved, slow circles, studying the weight shift of the Vronak's tree-trunk legs, the heaving breath that came before a charge. When it rushed, roaring and pounding the arena floor, Elias waited half a heartbeat longer than any sane man would. Then he slid low, letting the Vronak's momentum carry it into the electrified pillar at the ring's edge. The resulting shock arced like lightning. The alien convulsed once, twice, then dropped in a heap of smoking hide. Silence, then murmurs. Elias didn't raise his fists. Didn't cheer. He simply walked back toward the holding bench, adjusting the glove that had come loose during the roll. No one congratulated him. From the far corner of the arena, 2 towering silhouettes exchanged looks. Varzek, the Red Claw, whose species had dominated 24 systems through conquest alone, and Tarkal, son of stone, whose diamond-hard flesh made him impervious to most weapons. Their sneers were mirrored in every watching warrior. Fluke, Varzek hissed in galactic trade common. Even vermin sometimes bite. Tarkal rumbled a low agreement. Let the next match show him the gravity of strength. Elias took a seat on the edge of the bench, cracked his neck and stared up at the viewing deck. Not at the instructors. At the one who hadn't moved. Hadn't laughed. Raj. He stood like a monolith, cloaked in the furs of beasts no longer found alive. His predator caste was ancient, whispered about more than seen. Slitted eyes the color of frozen blood watched Elias with quiet intensity, unblinking. He hadn't moved once during the match. Elias had noticed that before. Raj didn't gloat. Didn't jest. He didn't even speak. But something about his posture, the weight of his stillness, was louder than the bellowing masses. The human exhaled slowly and looked away. It wasn't wise to hold a predator's gaze. Later that cycle, after mandatory recovery and nutrient injections, Elias found himself in the simulation hall. Another forced scenario, another setup. His opponent this time was a 6-limbed slicer beast bred specifically for internal containment tests. Real enough to kill, programmed just enough to stop once your heart did. The other cadets watched from the overhead gallery, expecting a bloodbath. The instructors watched because they were required to. And Raj? He stood in the shadows, unmoving. The sim environment rendered a rocky plateau under a scorching binary sun. Elias's breath came shallow. He had a knife, a single EMP charge and a slingshot rig. Nothing that could match the raw power of what skittered toward him from across the rock field, its claws tapping out a death march. He didn't run. He counted steps. 14 between each of the slicer's lunges. 3-second pause between scent acquisitions. Slow turn radius to the left. That would be its blind side. By the time the creature leapt, Elias was already mid-roll, using momentum to drive the EMP into its side vent. The device shorted its neural relay just long enough for him to jam the blade into the underside of its gaping maw. It spasmed once, then dropped. The simulation froze. The fake sun dimmed. Victory registered. Above, muted surprise rippled among the watchers. Raj was gone. No words were exchanged during the walk back to quarters. There rarely were. Other cadets stepped aside now, not out of respect, out of unease. Something was shifting. The human should have been broken by now, discarded. Yet here he was, unbowed. Worse, he was calculating. That night, Elias sat in the corner of the barracks, patching a tear in his arm guard. No one approached. No one asked how he'd done it. Except Raj. The apex predator emerged from the far side of the hallway like a ghost pulled from stone. No footsteps. No challenge. Just presence. Elias looked up but didn't stand. Raj tilted his head, slow and deliberate, like an animal testing whether the thing before it was threat or curiosity. The silence between them was thick. "I know what you're doing," Elias said quietly. "You watch them all. But you only follow me." Raj said nothing. His breathing was controlled, his jaw locked in stillness. Then, almost imperceptibly, he crouched, mirroring Elias's level, and tapped two claws against the floor, a rhythm. It wasn't a threat. Elias blinked. It was a pattern. Predator language. He repeated it slower. Raj responded with a different set, a short beat, then two longer ones. They sat in silence for minutes, tapping out what passed for a conversation. Raj finally stood and uttered a word in his own tongue, guttural, deep, and ancient. Elias didn't understand it fully. But he understood the tone. Acknowledgement. The following day brought the 3-species combat exercise. Teams of 3. Randomly assigned. Sabotage guaranteed. The instructors weren't just training soldiers, they were filtering out the unworthy. Elias ended up with a Naxan brute who barely acknowledged commands and a feeble-minded insectoid scout who buzzed out complaints with every step. They were pitted against Tarkal Varzek and an elite scout from the outer systems. The odds were a joke. Elias knew it. The instructors wanted to humiliate him in front of the apex crowd. They got more than they bargained for. Midway through the simulation, Elias's 2 teammates were eliminated, unsurprisingly by friendly fire. Tarkal's stone-arm strike alone had nearly caved in the insectoid's thorax. Elias had barely escaped, ducking through narrow ducts beneath the artificial terrain. It wasn't about fighting. It was about surviving. But the simulation wasn't designed to let him do that for long. Varzek cornered him near the east drop point, claws scraping across synthetic rock, yellow eyes gleaming with anticipation. "No more tricks, prey flesh," he growled. "No more hiding. You're done." Elias raised his fists, not because he thought he'd win, but because he wouldn't let them break him standing down. Before the first blow landed, something tore through the air like a sonic boom. Varzek was lifted from his feet, slammed into the wall with enough force to crack reinforced alloy. Raj stood over him, nostrils flaring, the claws on his right hand slick with green blood. Tarkal charged, slow but unstoppable. Raj didn't even step back. He moved forward, fast enough to blur, and sank both fists into Tarkal's midsection, lifting the stone beast clean off the ground before slamming him into the arena floor. Silence again. Not shock this time. Terror. Raj turned and looked at Elias. For the first time he spoke clearly in trade common. "Brother." The simulation ended. Alarms flared. Instructors rushed in. Medics retrieved the broken. Elias stood still, blood dripping down his temple. Not his. He didn't smile. Didn't speak. But somewhere deep inside he realized the tide had turned. He was no longer prey. And the galaxy had just started watching. The air in the observation deck was cool, dry, and sterile. A calculated environment meant to contrast with the raw brutality that occurred below. It also helped conceal the stench of blood. Elias stood at the edge of the training pit, waiting for the others to file in. He didn't look at them. He didn't need to. He could feel the way their steps paused near him now, not in fear but in uncertainty. Something had changed. They sensed it, though most didn't understand it yet. And those who did pretended they didn't. Across the sand Raj watched. The predator stood without armor, as he always did, his battle-worn hide scarred in elegant slashes that told the history of entire species. His eyes, slitted and rimmed in dull crimson, never left Elias. He didn't blink. Not because of some unnatural affectation, but because his kind had evolved beyond needing to. There were no wasted movements in Raj. No posturing. Just unrelenting focus. Elias adjusted the brace on his forearm, fingers lingering over a burn mark that hadn't healed right. He remembered that pain well. Remembered the first time he'd faced one of the sim beasts alone and realized the dome wasn't just for training. It was for thinning the ranks. And thinning in this place meant elimination. Today's simulation began with little ceremony. The signal burst overhead and the terrain shifted beneath their feet, forming what resembled a jungle ravine, all synthetic but accurate down to the biting insects and oppressive humidity. Elias didn't hesitate. He moved into the undergrowth, silent as vapor. Every step calculated, not because he feared death, but because survival had become a reflex. It no longer needed thought. It was instinct. Behind him, he heard the distant clash of metal and flesh. The simulation didn't pair them today, didn't place him on Raj's team. That would have drawn too much attention. Instead, the instructors ceded chaos and let nature take its course. 2 hours passed. Elias had taken out a scout, disabled another with a pit trap of his own design, and avoided 2 kill zones with clever misdirection. He was circling the central control point when he heard it, a roar that didn't echo through speakers but through flesh. It vibrated in bone. A sound not generated by code or simulation. Real. He turned, crouching low behind synthetic ferns, and saw the unmistakable shimmer of predator scale. Raj was moving through the underbrush like shadow given form, 2 opponents lying motionless behind him. Raj didn't pause when he passed Elias's hiding spot. Didn't look down. Just shifted slightly, barely noticeable, opening his flank in a gesture that could have meant anything to anyone else. To Elias it was clear he knew he was there. And he trusted him. A small squad broke into the clearing moments later, Tarkal among them. The golem-like creature scanned the brush with lifeless amber eyes, dragging a rail axe through the undergrowth. Elias stayed low, heart calm. His instinct urged retreat. But something else anchored him. Raj had stopped in the center of the glade, arms loose at his sides, shoulders still. Tarkal raised the axe. It never fell. Raj moved first, a blur of impossible momentum, striking with both arms and driving Tarkal into the ground so hard the floor dented. The other 2 soldiers reacted with delayed horror, scrambling to flank. Elias rose then, launching from cover. He moved without sound, without thought, throwing his only shock dart into the nearest one's thigh, paralyzing him mid-step. The second turned just in time to see Elias pivot and drive his elbow into the alien's throat. The skirmish ended in seconds. Efficient. Cling. When the dust settled, Raj turned toward Elias. He gave no words. But then he did something new. He nodded. The motion was slight. In any other being it might have meant nothing. In Raj it was monumental. Elias stepped forward. He didn't speak either. There was no need to. Words were for those who needed to explain themselves. They had long passed that threshold. The simulation ended with their shared victory. But it wasn't the result that made the instructors shift uncomfortably in their seats. It was the footage. The playback. Raj, apex of the predator caste, standing at Elias's side, not as a superior, but as a partner. That night, Elias was summoned to the lower training hall. Not unusual. He often volunteered for night drills. What was unusual was who waited for him there. Raj stood alone, flanked by 2 training dummies that were already half destroyed. He held out a combat blade, obsidian, serrated, and humming faintly from a resonating core. Elias took it without hesitation. For the next hour they didn't train. They danced. Raj didn't instruct through language. He demonstrated. Attacks came fast, deliberately brutal. But each time, Elias dodged just close enough to learn. They circled each other again and again, predator and man, and each pass brought Elias closer to understanding the rhythm of his style. Not brute force. Calculated aggression. The kind that knew when to break bones and when to shatter minds. By the end, Elias's arms ached. Sweat slicked his back. He couldn't feel his fingers. Raj stepped back and let out a low growl, one Elias had come to recognize as satisfaction. Why? Elias finally asked, voice hoarse. Raj regarded him, then tapped 2 claws to his chest and pointed one at Elias. You see, he said. It wasn't a full sentence. But it was the most Elias had ever heard him speak. Later, in the shared quarters, the others avoided Elias completely. Some out of fear. Others out of disbelief. He heard the mutterings, that Raj had chosen him. That the predator who had never acknowledged anyone now trained a human in private. They called him an anomaly. They whispered that he must be genetically enhanced. One cadet, a brutish mercenary from the mining colonies, confronted Elias directly. Demanded to know what spell he'd cast over Raj. When Elias didn't answer, the alien swung a heavy fist meant to break his jaw. Elias ducked, grabbed the wrist, and twisted. The crack echoed in the barracks. The mercenary screamed, and Elias let go without another word. The room stayed silent for the rest of the night. Days turned to weeks. Simulations continued. Exercises grew deadlier. Raj and Elias were no longer separated in missions. They were a team now, formally unassigned but always acting in tandem. Some instructors approved. Others clearly didn't. But none interfered. On the fourth week, a challenge was issued. Varzek, shamed by his last defeat, demanded a formal duel. Not just to Elias but to both of them. A test of alliance. Of dominance. They met in the combat ring, weapons sanctioned, crowd gathered. Elias stood still, blade at his side. Raj towered beside him, claws twitching with anticipation. Varzek entered with a partner from his own world. Both armored, both wielding blood-forged blades that sang when drawn. There were no words exchanged before the match began. The first strike came from Varzek, rushing toward Elias in a blind fury. Elias didn't retreat. He sidestepped, let the blade carve air, and countered with a slash to the exposed leg joint. Raj intercepted the second attacker mid-lunge, claws carving through reinforced plating like soft clay. It was a massacre but not messy. Precision. Every motion deliberate. When the duel ended, both challengers were on the ground, alive but barely. The match hadn't been to the death. But it had been a message. As they turned to leave the ring, Elias felt a shift in the air. The crowd wasn't laughing anymore. They were watching. Carefully. Not with scorn. With caution. Raj paused at the edge of the ring, glancing back once. Elias followed his gaze and saw the instructors on the upper tier, their faces unreadable behind holographic masks. Later that night, Elias sat alone in the darkness of the meditation chamber, watching the stars through the transparent dome. He didn't hear Raj enter, he never did. But the predator sat beside him, silent. They watched the stars together for a long time. Then Raj spoke again. Others will come. Elias nodded. Let them. Raj turned, his gaze sharp as a knife drawn in silence. We hunt. Elias smiled just a little. Yes, we do. The dome lights dimmed overhead, casting the chamber into a field of artificial starlight. The bond had been forged not by war but by something older. Recognition. A shared understanding of what it meant to be underestimated, and what it meant to earn power the hard way. Raj didn't need Elias to roar. He did it for him. And the galaxy was listening. The corridors of the training complex had grown quieter around Elias. Not empty, just subdued, as though the walls themselves had begun to acknowledge the shift. Where once there had been jeers, now there was silence. Where once he had been pushed or brushed aside by towering alien cadets, now a subtle birth was given. No words explained it. They simply moved differently around him now. A ripple effect. The cause wasn't mystery. They had seen Raj, killer of apexes, sovereign of death in the shadows, stand beside the human and utter the word none had ever heard him speak aloud. Brother. It echoed still in their minds. No translation needed. Elias didn't let the new attention distract him. He trained longer, harder, and quieter than ever. His days began in the obstacle pits, where gravity was quadrupled and oxygen deliberately thin. His hands bled from the grip drills, and his muscles ached from resistance regimens meant for species twice his size. At night, he studied old combat footage, Raj's movements, alien war patterns, failure points in the upper caste. He learned. Always. But respect in the arena wasn't loyalty. It was fear. That distinction became clear when the council summoned Elias under false pretenses. A simulated stealth course, they said. Solo infiltration under low light with aerial drones and heat sensors. Elias accepted without hesitation. He was already halfway through the faux jungle, crawling silently beneath humid leaves when he sensed it, something wrong with the terrain. The patterns weren't right. Too open. Too exposed. And then they came. 3 figures dropped from above with the weight of thunder. Not simulation drones. Real warriors. Real blades. Their movements weren't rehearsed or limited by safeties. Their strikes carried death. It wasn't a test. It was an execution. Elias rolled backward, barely avoiding a blade meant for his spine. He dove into a ravine and sprinted low, weaving between undergrowth, heart hammering without panic. One attacker flanked him, leaping from a tree, slashing his shoulder open. Blood soaked the sleeve of his suit, but Elias didn't stop. He led them further, deeper into the jungle's edge, where he'd set traps during the initial recon sweep. A false snare caught the first assailant by the ankle and yanked him upside down. Elias turned mid-stride, hurled a thermal flare and ignited the air. The second hunter screamed as the trap incinerated his visor. The third, silent and large, kept coming. Elias dragged himself into a narrow gorge, bleeding freely, and prepared for a last stand. That's when the predator arrived. There was no warning. No sound. Just movement, pure, violent, and final. Raj fell from the trees like a reaper born of gravity and fury. The third attacker didn't have time to raise his blade before Raj was on him. Claws pierced armor, muscle, and bone. The kill was efficient. Not showy. Personal. Elias sat against the rock wall, panting, vision blurring at the edges. Raj stood before him, chest heaving, blood spattered across his arms. He didn't ask who had sent them. He didn't need to. Elias nodded once, pressing gauze to his shoulder. They're getting desperate. Raj didn't speak. He only extended a clawed hand and Elias took it. The next day, no mention of the ambush surfaced in official reports. The instructors were quiet. The simulation records had been wiped. But among the cadets, word spread fast. Whispers grew sharper. The human had been marked. And Raj had answered. Varzek avoided Elias now. The once arrogant red-skinned giant turned corners early when he heard human footsteps. Tarkal, brooding and dense, still watched with stone-carved hatred, but he no longer moved to provoke. Even those who had once mocked Elias in the mess halls now chose distant corners to eat. Respect was never given in the academy. It was seized, sometimes in silence, sometimes in screams. Elias walked through the corridors with calm awareness. He wasn't untouchable. He knew that. Fear only worked until someone bolder decided to test its limits. But there was a difference now. He was no longer viewed as a mistake of diplomacy. He had become a variable. An anomaly. Something they couldn't explain. He saw it in the eyes of the instructors too. Especially when he and Raj requested co-combat approval. It wasn't a standard path. Training teams were randomized to prevent favoritism. No one in recorded history had requested to pair with another for extended tactical drills. But Elias stood before the board, posture straight, voice firm. We don't train better alone. They denied it, of course. Politely. With diplomatic language and procedural jargon. Raj responded by submitting his own challenge. A formal combat trial. No weapons. No environmental controls. 2 versus 6. A test of war bond efficiency. The academy couldn't deny that. The trial was scheduled within the cycle. The arena was packed. 6 combatants entered, handpicked from the elite species, fanged, armored, and bred to destroy. Elias and Raj entered together. The match began instantly, no ceremony. The others charged, roaring, fueled by years of tradition and belief that numbers and strength dictated outcome. They were wrong. Raj moved like death incarnate. Where they lunged, he was already behind them. Where they struck, he redirected. Claws swept throats. Knees shattered on impact. One fell with a crushed trachea. Another with an inverted shoulder socket. Elias fought differently, calculated, agile, using their weight against them. He disabled, not killed. Blades slid past him by millimeters. Elbows shattered pressure points. He moved like memory, every strike learned from 100 nights of silent drills. In 4 minutes it was over. All 6 lay broken. Raj stood over the last with one claw at the creature's throat. Elias held a blade above another's eye socket. They did not deliver the final blow. They stood side by side and stepped away. A gesture that screamed louder than a kill ever could. That night, they weren't summoned for punishment. They were summoned for commendation. And questions. High Command had taken notice. Not just of the victories. Of the bond. A human and a predator. Fighting not with rivalry but with instinctual harmony. You are not supposed to be compatible, one general said, voice filtered through layers of distortion. Your species are on opposite ends of the predation spectrum. Raj answered in growled syllables. Predators, recognize. Elias met the general's gaze. It's not about origin. It's about intent. They were dismissed shortly after, no reprimand. No further interference. But they knew. The council was watching. From then on, Elias and Raj trained in private. Their drills were no longer approved or logged. They built a language of motion, signals, shifts, and timing so perfect it looked choreographed. Raj taught Elias his people's blind angle striking. Elias showed Raj human misdirection, guerrilla ambushes, and feints. Their styles fused. Raj's violence became surgical. Elias's tactics became lethal. When word came that they would be included in the final planetary simulation, the air changed again. It was the last test before graduation. The apex trial. War scenario. Full planetary combat. Factions. Objectives. Elimination. No safety limits. They would not be paired. Elias expected that. He stood alone in the strategy hall, studying satellite terrain overlays. Others clustered in species-loyal teams, strategizing with inherited arrogance. Raj entered late. He crossed the room without pause and stood beside Elias. They said nothing. They didn't need to. Their alliance would not be official. But it didn't need to be. They would find each other. And when they did, the simulation would become something else entirely. War was coming. And the galaxy would see what happened when a human mind and an apex predator hunted as one. They dropped Elias into the war zone at dawn. The air was dense with simulation haze, engineered to mimic the atmosphere of a Class 4 combat planet. Thunder rumbled in the artificial distance, though no storm was scheduled. The terrain was mountainous, fractured with ravines, slick rock and dead brush. All around him, the sound of boots, many not human, rushed to prearranged positions. The final trial had begun. 4 factions. 50 combatants. 0 alliances permitted. He moved fast, low and without sound. His rifle was standard issue, familiar weight and recoil. The kind of weapon meant for soldiers, not survivors. But Elias had long since stopped being either. He was something else now. A drone buzzed overhead. He paused beneath the twisted branch of a hollow tree, eyes narrowed. The machine hovered, scanning. He waited, heartbeat slowed, breath held. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he tossed a reflective shard from his belt. It caught the light just long enough to divert the drone's sensors. When it shifted, he moved, silent and swift. 3 minutes later, the drone crashed, its optics crushed beneath a precisely placed stone trap. He kept going. The game wasn't to survive. It was to win. And winning meant eliminating the other factions before they did the same to him. But Elias had no illusions. He wouldn't last long alone. Not against what they'd arranged. The teams were stacked with the most physically elite from each species, many of whom had trained for this their entire lives. Some had been bred for it. He found the first body half an hour later, scorched, mangled and still smoking. The insignia on the torso confirmed it had belonged to Varzek's faction. Raj had passed through. Elias crouched beside the corpse. He recognized the cuts, deep, angled, brutal but efficient. Raj never lingered in his kills. Never overdid it. Each strike had purpose, like a line drawn with intention. This one said, "You are in my territory. Leave or die." Elias smiled, a breath of air caught in his chest. Raj was close. The map in his mind recalibrated. He moved northeast, scaling a cliffside with bare hands, ignoring the strain in his shoulder. Below, the sounds of chaos echoed, gunfire, screeches, the thunder of collapsing ground. Factions were already tearing each other apart. The council would be watching from orbit, evaluating every movement, every hesitation. But Elias wasn't there to prove a point. He wasn't there to survive. He was there to show them why they should never mistake silence for weakness. A detonation lit the valley below. A trap mine, pressure triggered, likely someone's attempt at thinning the field. Elias adjusted his position, scoped in and waited. Movement. 3 figures emerged, wounded and staggering. One raised a weapon. Elias fired once. The shot was clean through the wrist. The weapon clattered. He fired again, this time into the shoulder. Not fatal, but paralyzing. Let them crawl. Let them remember. He moved again before the next team could triangulate the shot. An hour passed. The sun above remained frozen, part of the simulation parameters. Time had no meaning here. Only consequence. Then came the signal, 2 sharp bursts on the comband embedded in his helmet. A frequency buried under encryption. One only he and Raj shared. Elias froze. Then whispered back. Location. A single syllable returned. North. No code. No coordinates. Just direction. That was enough. Elias made it there 20 minutes later. A shallow crater had formed around a crashed recon transport, now smoldering in the dust. Bodies lay strewn, some still twitching. Raj stood at the center of it all, breathing heavily, his claws stained a deep violet. A long gash trailed down his thigh, and a plasma bolt had burned across his upper back. But his posture hadn't faltered. He looked up as Elias approached. No words. No nod. Just understanding. They didn't have time for pleasantries. A faction converged on them within minutes. 6 strong, mixed species, all armed with heavy gear. They came in fast, confident, too loud. Elias and Raj split instinctively. The first fell to Raj's claws before he ever saw them. The second raised a grenade but took Elias's knife through the tricep before he could prime it. The third and fourth tried to flank, only to find their boots had been tampered with. Elias had sabotaged the terrain moments before. The fifth surrendered. The sixth ran. Raj let him. One survivor always told the story louder than a room full of corpses. They kept moving. They didn't speak. When they bled, they ignored it. When they ached, they adapted. The trial wasn't ending, it was evolving. By nightfall, only one other faction remained. And they were waiting. Raj and Elias approached the last known coordinates slowly, deliberately. A cliffside fortification overlooked a choke point, a kill zone designed to trap incoming threats. Mines laced the trail, turrets waited on towers, and snipers watched from blind nests. Elias studied it from afar. Raj knelt beside him, growling low. "It is a fortress." Elias nodded. "Not perfect." Raj tilted his head. "Weakness." Elias grinned. "Yes." They moved like liquid shadow. The first sniper's scope was blocked by reflective light, Elias's doing. Raj scaled the left tower while Elias snuck beneath the floorboards of the outer wall. The mines were bypassed using magnetized pins and hand-measured pressure pads. Every step was measured. Every breath accounted for. Then the first explosion went off, one of their traps reconfigured to backfire. Panic followed. The final faction scrambled to respond, breaking formation. That was all Elias needed. He surged upward from the crawlspace and dropped 2 guards with chokeholds. Raj dropped from the tower with a roar that shook the scaffolding. 3 more went down in seconds. Screams followed. One warrior, a brute even larger than Raj, charged with a blade meant to cleave tanks. Raj met him head-on. They clashed like planets colliding. Elias watched for an opening. The 2 predators circled, struck, bled. Raj's shoulder was dislocated. The brute had lost an eye. They didn't stop. When the brute lifted his blade for the final strike, Elias fired once. Not to kill, but to distract. That hesitation cost the brute everything. Raj ripped through his chest with both hands, roaring loud enough to shake dust from the rocks. Silence returned. The last standing soldier dropped his weapon and fell to his knees. The trial was over. The sky above flickered. Artificial stars blinked out. The simulation dissolved. They stood in a metal chamber once more. Observers stared down through glass. Generals, warlords, instructors who once mocked, evaluators who once dismissed. No one spoke for a long time. Then a voice rang out, slow and measured. "Cadet Elias Ward. Cadet Raj of the Apex caste. You have succeeded in full-spectrum dominance. You are no longer students. You are no longer candidates. You are warborn." Raj looked at Elias. Elias looked at Raj. This time Elias spoke first. "Brother." Raj's mouth opened into something not quite a smile. More a flash of teeth that meant recognition. After the ceremony, the council offered Elias a commission, a leadership position over a mixed-species strike force. A political symbol of unity. A chance to become legend. He declined. He walked past admirals, past watching crowds, past banners that had suddenly adopted Earth's colors. He found Raj waiting beside the gates of the academy. "You walk away?" the predator asked. "I don't need a throne," Elias replied. "I already have respect." Raj nodded. "And fear. Especially fear." They walked into the stars without ceremony. But those who watched them go remembered. They remembered the human who had come small, unwanted, ridiculed. And the apex predator who had called him brother. Together they weren't a threat. They were a promise.